Okay, thank you very much for inviting the Treasury to this very important conference on sustainability. As you can see from this slide, I'll try to be as quick as possible because I don't have much time, but the idea was to give a little bit of more color on the work they've been doing, especially over this latest period, to improve our approach, which we call a best effort approach in terms of alignment to the taxonomy when it comes to our green bond that we've been issuing since 2021. As you probably know, Italy is, of course, fully integrated within the EU commitments and the international sustainable finance standards. There's a general policy aimed at channeling and mobilizing resources towards projects that have tangible and verifiable environmental impact. You see in this table the set of instruments in terms of policy documents that lay down the Italian strategy towards neutrality by 2050, of course in line with EU targets and the Paris Agreement, the SDG goals. Now, what is important is that we have already targets by 2030 that are agreed and consistent with the EU Green Deal, that, as you know, has also been slightly revised, and the 50 of 55 package that was released in 2019. And in this slide, you can see at what point we are in terms of reaching these targets. Now, I will probably focus on the left-hand side tables where you can see on the third line the share of renewable energy sources in gross financial energy total consumption. You can see here we are slightly below 20%, and we have a very, very say, challenging target of getting to near 40% by 2030. So it's going to be quite challenging for Italy. If you go a little bit below, you see, however, that the share of electricity that is produced with renewable energy now stands at around 40%. Even here, there's still a road to be done because we are supposed to reach something above 60%. So now we are well above 2/3, but we have to get to quarter of, sorry, we have 1/3 and we have to get to 2/3 of total consumption of electricity based on renewable energy. But one important point that needs to be emphasized, the fact that it is true that we are not very near the targets, but the developments that we have achieved over these years are really remarkable. Just think about that from 2015 to 2020, the number of gigawatt that were installed in terms of renewable energy was around 5 gigawatt. And then from 2020 to 2025, we get to 20 gigawatt. So there have been a very impressive acceleration. You can see on the right side, you see that in terms of GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, so we have been able to achieve an 80% reduction since 1990, and over the last 20 years, the emissions have declined around 3%. And we have outperformed the EU average by 1 percentage point. But it's true that there are sectors that are lagging behind, and you can go back on the same table and you see that the share of renewable energy for transport is still very low. With the rebound after COVID, transport emission has increased much more than expected. And this is why you will see in one of the latest slides of this presentation how much effort has been carried out in terms of allocating the proceeds that we get from BTP Green to the transport system. What is interesting, however, in this slide is also looking at the emission intensity, so the GHG emissions that we have in Italy per capita, and the GHG emission you have per unit of GDP, and you see that Italy stands quite well in terms of average compared to in terms of comparison with EU average. And so we are even better placed than other relevant countries in Europe. And I think one of the what's behind these important results in terms of GHG emissions is the amount of energy saving that has been achieved in Italy over the last 10 years, especially thanks to the restructuring of private buildings and making them more energy efficient. Now, when it comes to our bond program, as you know, Italy introduced BTP Green thanks to a budget law of 2019 for 2020. And we started issuing these bonds in 2021 with an updated versions of the ICMA Green Bond Principles. These are the principles that we still stick to in our bond program. However, we went to a very important update of this framework just a few months ago in December, because we want to enhance all the reporting architecture, put some orders in terms of expenditure categories with respect to the initial framework. And this was very much based on the interactions that we had over these 5 years with ESG investors. And the other point that we worked a lot was to try to give more transparency in the way which double-check the alignment with the EU taxonomy criteria. Of course, BTPs are green, supports expenditures that contribute to the UN development goals and to the EU sustainable taxonomy objectives. And all these expenditures are within the EU state budget, and so we don't cover any other type of expenditures. Of course, what we get from the expenditures that are used to, that are covered by the proceeds of BTP Green do not represent the broader effort that the country is doing in terms of transition effort, because there are other sources that can be used for that. For example, think about the EU level programs and instruments, but also there are several other expenditures where we don't have much granularity or information, so we don't use to finance BTP Green because we don't have enough information, but also these expenditures are important in terms of reinforcing the sustainability path of the country. And what I say here is that in a few hours, we're going to publish something that I will anticipate you right now. We're going to publish the report regarding the issuances of BTP Green in 2025. So this report will be released very shortly. Just to give you an idea on what we've been issuing here, you have a quick review of the issuances from 2021 up to this year. And so far, we have issued 65 billion euros of BTP Green. And in this next slide, you can see what has been the breakdown that we do in terms of, first of all, category of expenditure. That you can see from the left-hand side that the issuances of 2025, and this goes hand in hand with what has happened in the previous years, goes for energy efficiency. Part of these have been financing the so very famous called the super bonus. But the other important category is the transportation, where there is a lot of intensity in terms of capital expenditure, so there's a lot of volumes that are taking place in there. And then you see the other component where, for example, the protection of environment and biodiversity takes quite a relevant role. And then you see how these expenditures are being carried out over the years of issuance, 2025, and 3 years before, which is the look-back period that we use according to the current framework. Here you have also a breakdown in terms of nature of the expenditure, where it comes to OPEX or CAPEX or incentive schemes and so on. And on the right side, you can see the breakdown by economic sector, because a lot of economic sectors are involved in these expenditure, as you can see. Finally, in terms of breakdown, thanks to the granularity of information that we are able to collect now, for a very large share of it, more than 85%, we know exactly where they're being spent throughout the countries. And you can see there where these expenditures goes to in the different macro regions of the country. And I have to say that these expenditures are broadly balanced in terms of geographical allocation. There is Part of these interventions, 13%, instead goes to projects that are multi-area projects, so you cannot assign them to one region or one micro-region. And part of these instead goes abroad because there are international cooperation projects on environment where these expenditures go to, and we take care also of these, we consider also these expenditure. Now, the focus that I want to give in the next two slides in how we pursue the goal of trying to give evidence of how much our expenditures are aligned to the taxonomy. And in this latest report that we publish tomorrow, you will see that the focus from our side has been especially on trying to double check the alignment with the so-called substantial contribution to the 6 environmental objective of the taxonomy. And whether it's possible, we're also trying to analyze the consistency with the so-called NSH principle. So what we do is to carry out a multi-level screening process that we have built inside the department, and we apply this multi-level approach to selected state budget items to evaluate if potentially they are eligible versus the criteria of the taxonomy that are set in the delegated acts. But the problem for a sovereign is that we have a very large and heterogeneous type of public expenditure. So in some cases, we are able to use simple mapping tables whereby the denomination of the expenditure is very clear in the Italian state budget and in the mapping of the taxonomy. In many other cases, it's not like that. And so we need to have a case-by-case calibration based on one side of the public accounting data, and on the other side, from the information, quantitative and qualitative, they receive from the administration that are in charge of using this money for the expenditures. And these administrations are mainly ministries, but not just ministries, there are also agencies, and they are all part of the Interministerial Committee for Green Bonds. So in just 2 words, the idea is to try to give evidence on the way we try to track the eligibility versus the taxonomy criteria, as I said, mainly the SEC, the substantial contribution, on a best effort basis. That's what we're trying to do. And when it's feasible, we also try to double check with the NSH condition. Of course, when it comes to MSS, minimal social safeguards, these are insured for almost all the expenditures because the Italian regulatory framework and the adherence to the national standards like the OECD guidelines, the UNGPs, and the ILO conventions, these guarantees that most of the expenditures are automatically compliant with the minimum social safeguards criteria. So when it comes to the results, just for the sake of time, if you look at the below part of this slide, you see that with the latest report, we are able to say that more than 80% of the allocated resources meet the SEC criteria for at least one of the 6 climate environmental objectives of the taxonomy. What we're talking here mainly, we're talking about the energy efficiency, the transport, the environmental protection, and the biodiversity. So these are all areas where the SEC criteria is fulfilled. Where instead we have also trying to do the exercise on the NSH, we see that almost 69% of the allocated resources are compliant with these principles. So here you have just, I think, a nice representation of what we're talking about. So you see that on the top, you see that 82% of the allocated resources are compliant both with the SEC and the MSS, 69% with all the 3, so SEC, the NSH, and MSS. And instead, almost all, 95%, is, for the reasons I explained before, are compatible with the MSS. And then you see these 5% of activities, which is currently outside the scope of the evaluation, the screening criteria of the taxonomy. And here we are talking about agriculture, we are talking about international agreements, we got environmental research where the taxonomy still does not regulate under technical screening criteria how to consider these expenditures. But we include them among the expenditures that are financed with the PTP Green, but so far we are not able to say that they are taxonomy compliant. So what we can conclude from that, well, if I had to compare these results to the report of last year, definitely there's been an improvement because we cannot confirm the SEC criteria approximately only on the 13% of the resources, but last year it was 21%. And in SH compliance, now there are almost slightly above 31% of expenditure that are not compliant with them, or we are not able to check the compliance with that, but last year it was even at 40%. But still, the alignment with the taxonomy remains a very complex and strong data-dependent exercise because of the heterogeneity of environmental or relevant public expenditures and the fact that there is actually an absence of a mandatory sustainability disclosure requirement for a lot of the public entities that which we interact with. So that is why this is an ongoing process of trying to keep on refining these criteria in order to improve the quality of our best effort exercise. Very last thing that I want to add, however, since last year, what we try to do is not just to capture the environmental impacts, especially in terms of CO2 avoided emissions. So you can see, for example, that the amount of money that we raised with BT Green Shoe last year was slightly below 14 billion euros. You see that what they allow us in terms of total reduction of CO2. There are different categories because for each categories there are different models that are used to quantify this impact. For the first 5 categories of expenditures, we use one model, and the 6th, which is the research, inevitably needs to use a different model. But what we are trying to do also to understand what has been the impact of these expenditures in terms of in economic terms. So on one side, we try to check the impact on GDP, which was around 20 billion on the short term of induced GDP, and this is just, I say, the immediate direct impact on the economy. But in the report that's going to come tomorrow, you will see also we're trying to estimate a long-term impact of these expenditures in terms of GDP. And then you see also the work units that have been induced by this acceleration in GDP. So our commitment on these asset class will continue over time because we see a lot of benefits on being present in this market as a large issuer. And I really thank you, the organizer, for giving us the opportunity to give more disclosure on our policy now and going on. Thank you very much.